Welcome back to the Aussie Property Blueprint. Today we're going to have a hard conversation. Why your safe property might be killing your wealth. We need to talk about the biggest lie in Australian real estate, the idea of set and forget. You know the story. You buy a property, you put a tenant in, and you forget about it for 10 years, hoping that when you wake up, you're a millionaire. But I had a conversation recently that proves why this is dangerous. A friend came to me. Let's call him Mark. Mark thought he was winning. He bought a unit a couple of years ago. The tenant paid rent on time. He never heard a peep. He thought, great passive income. But when we actually ran the diagnostics on his portfolio, the reality was brutal. Zero capital growth in 2 years. And once we added up the straight-up fees, the council rates, and the mortgage costs, he wasn't making money. He was bleeding $10,000 a year. Mark didn't have an asset. He had a liability masquerading as an investment. Today, we are moving beyond basic tips and tricks. We are going to perform a portfolio health audit. I'm going to give you the exact framework, the 5 critical vital signs that professional investors use to decide whether to kill a property or keep it. We'll cover why high rental yield is often a trap, the body fat ratio of your loan, and the one psychological barrier stopping you from getting rich. Let's dive in. Let's start with the first vital sign, the nutrition of your property. In the industry, we call this rental yield. Most beginners calculate this simply: annual rent divided by purchase price. If you buy a place for $600,000 and it rents for $600 a week, you're looking at roughly a 5.2% gross yield. But here is where I want to add some context that isn't in the brochures. High yield can be a warning sign. In Australia, we have a multi-speed market. In Sydney or Melbourne, you might only get 2% or 3% yield. In Brisbane or Adelaide, maybe 4% to 5%. But go out to a mining town or a regional center, and you see 7%, 8%, maybe even 10%. Amateurs chase the 10%. They think, wow, positive cash flow. But you have to ask, why is the yield so high? Usually, it's because the property value is stagnant. People there don't want to buy. They're transient workers who only want to rent. If nobody wants to buy, capital growth is impossible. Furthermore, there is a gross versus net trap. I've seen investors buy in North Queensland chasing 6% yields. But because of cyclones and flood risks, the insurance premiums there can be $4,000 to $6,000 a year. That is massive. In Sydney, insurance might be $2,000. In a cyclone zone, that extra cost eats your entire profit margin. So, the first lesson of the audit: don't just look at the top-line revenue. You need to look at the cash flow, which is the property's metabolism. This leads us to vital sign number 2. Cash flow is the difference between what comes in, rent, and what goes out, everything else. In this high-interest rate environment we are living in right now, cash flow is the number one reason investors go bust. They run out of oxygen. Ideally, for a standard investment property around the $700,000 to $800,000 mark, you shouldn't be out of pocket more than $200 to $300 a week. That's the safe zone. Now, I know some of you are high-income earners. Maybe you're on the top tax bracket. You have what I call a thick layer of financial fat. You can afford to lose money each week because you're utilizing negative gearing. You're using your high salary to subsidize the property, banking on future growth. But for the average investor, you need to be careful. If that negative cash flow grows too large, say expensive straight-up fees in a high-rise building, you become trapped. You can't save for the next deposit because your first property is eating all your savings. You need to treat your property like a body. If you want to bulk up capital growth, you might need to consume more energy than you produce for a while. But you can't starve yourself to death. Actionable step: open your spreadsheet. Add up council rates, water, insurance, management fees, and maintenance. If your property is costing you more than $15,000 a year to hold after tax deductions, you need to ask if the growth justifies the pain. Now, let's talk about the engine of wealth: leverage. This brings us to vital sign number 3, LVR, loan-to-value ratio. Think of LVR as your portfolio's body fat percentage. 100% LVR, you're obese with debt. One heart attack, rate rise, and you're done. 20% LVR? You're dangerously skinny. You aren't healthy. You're undercapitalized. Many people think paying off the mortgage is the goal. I disagree. The goal is control, not ownership. We see the most successful investors maintaining an LVR between 50% and 70%. This is the athlete range. You have enough debt to amplify your returns, but enough equity buffer to sleep at night. Why does this matter? Because of vital sign number 4, ROI, return on investment. This is where the magic happens. If you buy a $500,000 property with cash and it grows 10%, you made $50,000. That's a 10% return. But if you used a 20% deposit, $100,000, and borrow the rest, you still made $50,000 capital growth, but you only put in $100,000. That is a 50% return on investment. That is 5x leverage at work. But here is the other thing you need to know. You can't just rely on the market. You can manufacture ROI. How? Scarcity and emotion. In my experience, you only need 2 emotional buyers to drive a price to the moon at an auction. Investors calculate with spreadsheets. Owner-occupiers calculate with feelings. If you buy a property with scarcity, a unique heritage facade, a north-facing aspect, a specific school zone, you are buying emotional insurance. You can also manufacture ROI through renovation. But be warned, not all renovations make money. If you spend $40,000 on a kitchen to increase the value by $40,000, you've wasted your time. You need to find the gap where a $40,000 spend creates $100,000 in value. That's where the profit lives. We've done the math. We've checked the yield, cash flow, LVR, and ROI. Now comes the final and hardest vital sign. It's not a number. It's a decision matrix. Buy, sell, or hold. This is where psychology kills returns. We call it the sunk cost fallacy. You might be holding a property right now that you know is a dog. It hasn't grown in 5 years. It costs you money, but you say, I can't sell it because then I make the loss real. Or, I have an emotional attachment to it because it was my first apartment. You need to hear this. Every day you hold a bad asset, you are paying an opportunity cost. If you have $200,000 of equity tied up in a lazy property, that is $200,000 that could be working in a high-growth market like Perth or a gentrifying pocket of Brisbane. By holding the bad one, you aren't just losing money, you're missing out on the gains of the good one. Think of your properties like habits. A high-growth property is a good habit, like going to the gym. A lazy property is a bad habit, like smoking. You can't get healthy while keeping the bad habits. You need to cut them. We help clients do this every day. We look at the future potential versus current drag. If the property isn't going to outperform the market in the next 10 years, we sell it. We recycle that capital into something that works. So, let's wrap this up with your homework for this week. I want you to look at your portfolio, whether it's 1 property or 10, and rate them against these 5 metrics. Yield. Is it feeding you or starving you? Cash flow. Can you afford the metabolism of this asset? LVR. Is your debt level healthy, 50 to 70%, or dangerous? ROI. Is your cash working hard or is it lazy? The decision. Is this property a good habit or a bad habit? Investing isn't about collecting keys. It's about accumulating quality assets. Don't be afraid to prune the dead branches to let the tree grow. Don't let your portfolio drift. Audit it. Fix it. Grow it. This has been the Aussie Property Blueprint. See you in the next episode.